Okay, we're back and we're going to talk about Chapter 11, Sexual Orientation. I'm going to make a little disclaimer at the beginning of this chapter that for the first time in all these chapters, I've allowed my dogs to be in the same room where I'm recording. So if you suddenly hear frantic barking, my two German Shepherd mixes are the culprits. Okay, so that had nothing to do with the topic of the chapter, just fair warning if you hear barking. Okay. So I wanted to start with Kinsey's sexual orientation rating scale. This has been the subject of some controversy because, first off, the idea that Kinsey introduced that people aren't either homosexual, heterosexual, or completely balanced in their attraction to both sexes and called bisexual. Instead, he says it's a continuum. Based on his survey data, he came to the conclusion that you could identify maybe as heterosexual, but you have maybe homosexual fantasies, or you've had homosexual contact at some point in your life, but you consider yourself mostly heterosexual. So you'd be maybe in the 1 category instead of the 0. Or vice versa. You could consider yourself completely homosexual, but you have had some heterosexual contact or sometimes fantasies or something like that. So maybe you'd be in the 5 instead of the 6. A 3 should be completely balanced in your orientation towards both sexes. Over on the right of the panel, I inserted the statistics on the current estimates of the number of people, males and females, who exclusively identify as a 6. That doesn't include anybody who might fall. Sorry, that was my dog. I told you. Now, because I mentioned them, they're starting a play bout. Okay. So that doesn't include people who consider themselves somewhere along the continuum. It only includes people who are exclusively homosexually oriented. They report all of their fantasies, all of their activities, all of their partners, all of their relationships, their romantic attractions, all are oriented towards somebody of their same sex, and that's how you fall into the 6 category. To fall into the 0 category, it would be exactly the same criteria, but it's always oriented towards people of the other sex. So that's what we mean by this heterosexual homosexual rating scale. And the idea that a lot of psychologists like about this scale is that it allows for a lot of variation. It allows for nuanced behavior. It allows for people don't have to be rigidly identified as one thing or another all the time. They can still identify as one thing and feel a certain way and maybe have fantasies or something else that, historically we might have said you shouldn't be having those fantasies if you are whatever orientation you declare yourself to be. This allows for a lot more nuance. So I hope the barking's not bothering you. I'm used to ignoring it, so I'm just going to keep going. All right, so the theories of the origins of sexual orientation. One other thing I wanted to mention about this chapter is that there are a lot of people who teach human sexuality who don't like books that have this chapter in it because they use terms like this ghettoizes homosexuality, puts it into its own chapter. I really want to make it clear that part of the reason why I chose this text that contains this chapter is that it gives us an opportunity to talk about some of these theories, like how do we come to be oriented towards the sex of the people that we are oriented towards. It's not just talking about homosexuality in this chapter. We're talking about sexual orientation. So no matter how you identify, I'm going to try and explain some of the theories behind how your orientation may have evolved. Okay. Interestingly, the one that's making the most noise is my 14-year-old, and then the 3-year-old is sort of dancing around her. So, biology. This is our most well-substantiated theory of sexual orientation, the biological side. So I'm going to spend most of my time talking about biology. So, first off, let's look at the evidence that comes from animals. A lot of people who are against homosexual behavior in particular will say, well, only humans display that behavior, so it's unnatural. But if you look at animals, you see that there is a substantial portion, in fact, a higher rate among animals than among humans in some species of homosexual behavior. Among sheep, Larkin and his colleagues established that about 8% of sheep in herds are oriented towards their same sex. It's usually the males, and they will mount the other males. And they will, in fact, establish a pattern where they literally only mount the other males. It's not like, well, speaking of my dogs playing, right? Dogs will oftentimes mount each other, and it doesn't matter what sex they are. It doesn't matter what sex the dog they're mounting is. It's really about dominance. That's not what Larkin observed. He observed sheep whose tendency, their orientation, was to mount sheep of their same sex. Among the albatross, especially when the climate is in such a condition that males are not surviving very well, they see a spike in albatross that will pair bond with each other. And the thing about albatross is that they pair bond for life. And so the female albatross, especially in cases where there aren't enough males to go around, you'll see this spike in albatross that'll pair bond for life. They'll make their nests together. They'll lay eggs, because females always lay eggs anyway. It's just they aren't fertilized. They'll sit on their eggs, and they'll, seem to be in love with each other. I don't know if birds feel love like what we're talking about. I don't even know what love is in humans, right? That's a complex concept. But so the idea is that albatross display lesbian tendencies. If you Google gay porpoise, you may find some other stuff, but you'll also find videos that tourists have taken at like SeaWorld and stuff, where they're like, this looks like these two male porpoises are actually having sex or maybe raping each other. We're not sure exactly the intent of the penetrator, but they definitely have their penises out, and they are rubbing against each other and mounting each other and things like that. And one theory on it is that it's a way to actually build pod cohesion, which is what sex is oftentimes used for, right? Is to bond and bring people closer together, or bonobo monkeys closer together, or porpoises closer together. So it may reduce the feeling of competitiveness and make the pod closer together. I got this off the internet. Zoo seeks female penguins after male birds form gay relationships. They brought in penguins to try and mate and repopulate their penguin display, and the males picked each other. And even though they had females available, the male penguins were pairing up with each other. So I've got evidence from birds. I've got animal evidence from what are called cetaceans, which is porpoises. That's the group they belong to. I've got herd animals. Basically 450 species have been documented to display homosexual behavior for different motives, seemingly, but basically you can't use the argument that it's unnatural among humans when we see it so commonly across animals. So animals provide some evidence of a biological basis of sexual orientation. Prenatal hormones. This is linked in our modules, but testosterone in the womb can shape our brains. This video is actually a really interesting one because it talks about the effect of testosterone on not only our brains but also our bodies. What typically happens in the womb is that in the face of a Y chromosome, the male fetus will be exposed to testosterone while the hands are growing, and so you'll end up with a ring finger that's longer than the index finger. In females, with the absence of the Y chromosome, that testosterone shouldn't be present, and so you end up with a ring finger that's shorter than the index finger on average for most women. But here's the trick. What they have found is that the pattern is reversed for gays and for lesbians. And so one way to establish a biological basis for sexual orientation is to look at other things that are affected by testosterone, like body parts. I already mentioned that among gay men, the penis tends to be larger, and that's a function of having been exposed to testosterone in the womb. See, it gets really complex because different parts of your body grow at different times in the uterus, in the womb, during fetal development. And so a bath of testosterone in one period can cause masculinized hands. A bath of testosterone in another period can cause masculinized genitals. A bath of testosterone in another time period can cause masculinized brain. The assumption is, the working theory right now, is that among the average male, the bath of testosterone will persist throughout the development of all of those things, and you'll get masculinized body and brain. But what we know is that testosterone rides a little bit of a roller coaster. And so if during a particular portion of development, an XY carrying baby gets deprived of testosterone when they should have experienced it, they may get a more feminized brain. If a XX carrying fetus who's not supposed to be being exposed to testosterone gets a bath of it, then they may get a more masculinized brain. And so I use this hand example to illustrate that prenatal hormones affect our bodies, and we should probably assume it also affects our brains while we're developing in the womb. Now, I always like to tell my students in class, don't measure your fingers and then draw conclusions about your sexual orientation. It is not a predictor of sexual orientation. It tends to be correlated with sexual orientation. So straight women tend to have a ring finger that's shorter than index, and gay men tend to have a ring finger that's shorter than index. And then it's flipped among straight men and lesbians with a longer ring finger than pointer. If you measure these, it's called the 2D 4D ratio, because your index finger is your second digit, so that's the 2D. Your ring finger is your fourth digit, so that's the 4D. So we're looking at the ratio between your index finger and your ring finger. The 2D 4D ratio is not necessarily the same on both sides of your body. And there's a lot of research going on trying to figure out which hand is the better predictor of which thing. I've read research on the association between this ratio and aggression, and some literature says the right hand's more important, some literature says the left hand's more important, and this is having already controlled for handedness, like whether you are right or left-handed. They already control for that, and then they measure the hands. Some research says the right hand predicts aggression, some say the left, some research says both predict. I've been doing research on the 2D 4D ratio and perceptions of sexual intent in actors that are provided in the study, and what I'm finding is that the left hand is the best predictor of the ratings that people give. So I don't know which hand you should measure. Interestingly, my right hand is a lesbian and my left hand is straight. So I really recommend that you not use your hands as a predictor of your sexual orientation. If you are questioning your sexual orientation, maybe this would help to answer the question for you. But if you were not questioning your sexual orientation, don't use your hands. All right. It's just a little quirky thing that might go along with sexual orientation, because remember, your hands develop way earlier in gestation than your brain structures do. So your hands may have a particular pattern and your brain might have a different one, because you may have been exposed to or missed testosterone during hand development and then been exposed to or missed testosterone during brain development weeks and weeks later. So that's my little caveat on interpreting the fingers. Let's go ahead and take a little break. We'll come back and talk about what am I talking about with these brain structures and how they might impact sexual orientation.